everybody, James Robert Elliott here with Roy Vela, and we're going to be talking today about captivating your audience with storytelling, how to be remembered, how to be unique, how to be impactful, how to be influential, and how to be remembered. Roy and I were actually talking before we started about if you just inundate people with facts and data and speeds and feeds, it's going to A, overwhelm them, and B, they're not going to remember you. So avoid doing that. Why do you think that happens, Roy? Why is that one of the worst things you can do, is just piling on information or data or facts the first thing you do with people?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say we fail to recognize and appreciate that we are storytelling and digesting creatures and have been for millennia. In fact, for most of humanity's existence,
Good point.
wasn't a lot of data, wasn't a lot of facts. If anything, the human brain is a pattern recognition machine.
True.
We do that best. We're able to pick the tiger out from the reeds, right? And the data part, which is the modern world, no question, and data is very valuable. I'm a big fan of science and data, like STEM all day long, but that is not how the human brain processes and retains information. It just isn't. In fact, that's why computers, the whole act of computing is so valuable, because it does what we don't do well, right? It is able to crunch big chunks of data. We're bad at that. So if you want a human who you're engaging with to remember what you're talking about, it's got to be visual. It's got to, imagery and metaphor and analogy and stories are way more impactful. That's what they leave the room with.
Fair. Fair
If
point.
they want the data, they'll come back to you for that later, right? And your computer will give it to their computer. But that's not the interpersonal human interaction that's happening, right?
Fair point.
Um,
Fair point.
yeah.
The other thing that's interesting too is I think a lot of people forget that 40% of people are visual. And they we need to paint a picture for them. 40% of people are more kinesthetic, doing so some action, some experience, and a story is a perfect way to have an experience with them. There's 20% are auditory people. It's more like, let's talk about it, and then 20% of that are the digital fact finding, give me mountains of data type people. And I mean, 20% of 20%, what is that, like 4% of people really are interested in the mountains of data. So to your point, I think painting that picture, and getting that feeling, that emotion for them, you're hitting 80% of people with your communication. I think that's, to your point, why it's so effective. I think that's why it's for eons. I mean, we've heard of Aesop's fables, and our grandparents always told us stories, and some
Totally.
of the best teachers I've ever had were storytellers. I mean, we there was like problem students, quote unquote, in other classes, kids that didn't do well, or they were bored, or they disturbed the class because they were bored.
Yeah.
And I remember one teacher, this one kid was getting such good marks in this one class, and horrible marks in the class. They thought the teacher was just giving him, gimme marks or something, or became, felt bad. So that the principals would come in and supervise the classes, because they couldn't believe he was getting like 80s and 90s in this class when he was getting 30s and 20s in other classes. It was
Yeah.
just a great teacher storytelling, taught metaphor and example. So it was
Totally.
really cool to see.
Yeah. And it's not that the images and the metaphors and the analogies aren't communicating vital information, right?
Fair.
I mean, one of the I used to do a ton of paid public speaking. I've toned it down a bit now, but and especially with COVID and everything. But
Fair.
one of my images that came up was a whale side by side with a diver, right? And people kept bringing that back up to me, and the message was it was that part of the deck was about fintech, that the big guys, the whales, seem significant and important, but they're not the dangerous ones. It's the little divers in there, when there's hundreds of them or thousands of them, that are actually the dangerous ones,
Fair.
right? In the new wave. And slide after slide of that, where you're telling a story that relates directly to the market dynamics and what's happening and why. And people remember it. People remember it. They're like, oh, yeah. It's a very impactful. If you had just said there are big banks and little fintech competitors, I've heard that a million times.
Yeah,
But
not
the
as
whale
impactful.
and the diver side by side, I remember that image. Yeah.
It's a great, even when I compare the conscious mind to the unconscious mind, 5% of our brain is our conscious mind, 95 is our unconscious sort of
Mhm.
autonomic brain that does all, patterns, habits, behaviors, things we want to do, things we don't want to do.
Right.
And again, I often pair a picture of an elephant with a little tiny little rider on top of the elephant, because to your point, it
Right.
illustrates, wow, it's like, yeah, am I really trying to push an elephant around by consciously trying to push myself to do things I don't want to do, or stop myself from things that are automatic? No wonder it's not
True.
working. So
Yeah.
yeah, very
Yeah.
valid.
And then, I would say on top of all of that, so that's a bit of your slides and how you tell the story. But the other reality is the delivery, right? We don't appreciate how important status is, how important motion is. The difference between high status, where you take your time, you don't move very much, there's not a lot of activity, versus low status when you're constantly shifting and moving, and there's a bunch of interpersonal dynamics that come across
There.
when you're presenting, and no one will, not no one, very few people will be able to call that out and say, I believed him because he had a lot of high status activity,
There.
right? Like that's not a
That
thing,
was it. That was the thing.
right? Right? Or or as we were discussing before we came on, like silence. Silence is massively powerful. People underappreciate
Mhm.
silence. That leaving space, that making a statement and then waiting is unbelievable, right? Like people, in fact, it will make lower status people nervous. They're like, no, I got to fill the space.
Feel the space, no radio silence. Yeah.
No radio silence, and yet you're being respectful to your audience as well with silence, right? So I tell you something new, you're still processing. If I go straight on to my next point, that's actually a little disrespectful. I need to give you the time to digest. I can't feed you a Thanksgiving dinner all in one thing. I have to plate it. Like if you don't plate it, it looks great, but I can't take anything from this. I don't know how to process this interaction, right? And
Sure.
even
Yeah.
and then on the personal up, so there's the dinner, there's plating it, and then there's the chewing and digesting yourself personally, like your own system. um, I mean, we all we have all heard about, we don't chew enough, right?
Yeah. Fair.
We
Fair.
we put it in our mouths as we swallow, and we all know it'd be much healthier if you chewed whatever the number is. Chew a dozen times before you swallow. Um, and it's the same with information, right? So
Mm.
your brain, again, you see what I just did. It's a metaphor. It's an analogy. People go, right, Thanksgiving dinner, right? I get it. I
Makes
know.
sense. Got to chew. Yeah. To digest the information or the food. Exactly. You got to chew. You got to pause. You got to take your time. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people, whether they're nervous or they want to get everything out, or they want to deliver every piece of content, make sure, okay, I got to get through my whole slides. Well, if you get through all your slides and it hasn't been impactful and you've blown people away, that's much less useful than, okay, we only got through half or 2/3 of the slides, but
Yeah.
people got it. We went deep versus going, broad and superficial. And
Well,
people
and I
got
would
it.
also say it's appreciating, it's being clear with yourself what you're trying to achieve. So the reality is, the vast majority of meetings, the objective is for the next meeting, is to get the next meeting, is to increase the engagement and interest and curiosity to go deeper, right? There's very few meetings where you have the one meeting, you provide all the data, and they go, good, we're done.
We're in.
Like, right? Yeah, there is a classic drinking from the fire hose. Like, if you try and give someone a fire hose worth of information, they pretty much get nothing, and they may feel like you were trying to drown them. Like
Yeah.
that's not valuable, And by the way, I'm not against graphs. I'm not against data. Again, like,
Yeah.
but there needs to be a coherent story where people go, right, yeah, got it. No, I'm going to remember that. And by the way, when you enable them to do that, you did some other miracle of humanity. You enabled them to pass it on,
Fair.
right? So remembering it when they leave the meeting and they're back with their colleagues. Oh, how'd that meeting go? Oh, it was great. You know what he told us crazy? He threw up this whale, and I'll never forget. Blah blah blah. Like you enable. Whereas if you throw up a graph, they can't throw up the graph. Oh, he threw up this great graph. You know, like
Have lots of circles and colors.
right. And that's kind of the purpose, really. I mean, when you come right down to it, the purpose of storytelling is to pass it on.
Fair, you're right, and that's how they, again, for years, that's how they could, if they didn't write things down, they didn't have paper, or it took you a while to carve it out of stone. So they told stories, and they got passed on, and to your point, and on and on.
Right.
It's interesting how, I mean, you know, I've done this in the past too, and I want people to be aware too. What do you think about people trying to showcase how smart they are, or how worth it they are, how much of an expert they are by just over, you know, on speeds and fees and facts and data? Talk to us a bit about that. Do you think that's why part of it? I think it's nervousness part of it. We over deliver, or overshare, I should say. But what do you think of that idea too? The nervousness, or trying to prove, oh, I'm smart. You should hire me. You should promote me. You should respect me.
I mean, again, it comes back to status. Okay, so a lot of motion in the head, in the body, a lot of words without a lot of silence, and a lot of data. An over inundation of data is communicating low status.
Sure.
High status, low status comes in with a pile of papers and a calculator and a computer and plops everything down at the table. Sure. High status may come in with a pad and a pencil, but may not. May just come in with nothing and will be listening. Like so part of the interesting dynamic is that getting over the nervousness is about realizing you know your stuff. You don't have to I mean, it's classic sort of overkill.
Yeah.
Right? And that overkill doesn't help anybody. You know, it doesn't help the receiver because there's too much information. They don't have anything to, you know, get their teeth sunk into and remember. And it's overkill on the other side because thou doth protest too much. Like you're just, you know, which makes me think it's either not true or you don't believe it.
Fair. Or maybe you don't know enough. Even Einstein, the great Einstein, he said, if you can't explain it simply enough, then boil it down that way. I think he said a kid could understand it. You don't know well enough. So I think you're right. Whether we give that impression sometimes, or whether sometimes it's true, we do need to be more polished or researched, or we're so worried about looking great. We're trying so hard to look great, and it ends up, you know, sabotaging that and doing the opposite, which is interesting.
Yeah. In the same vein, Richard Feynman was a fantastic storyteller. He told amazing stories that, you know, wasn't about his ability to do astrophysics or math or anything else, but it was just an impactful story that, you know, people are still watching his lectures, you know, long after he's gone. And, you know, that's what it comes down to, right? And that kind of status.
It's that memory, exactly, being memorable. We talked earlier about being memorable. Talk to us how to cause action, because whether you're doing a pitch, or a manager is presenting to their team, or someone's trying to sell or have someone buy their service or whatever, you know, how do you cause action in others? How do you create action?
Yeah. I you know, for me also, it is that action causing. I mean, English is funny language sometimes. So we say that you move someone. I was moved, right? And you move someone, that is creating action. That is causing them to go, huh, okay, and to change their perspective, or to introduce new information, or to get them to influence their team. Like there's a lot of impact to be had from being moving.
Sure.
And by the way, when we say that, we tend to mean emotionally. Right. So I move them by inspiring them, or by, I mean, and people move, I mean, there's negatives that people move people with fear. Like they're like, oh God, like the ramifications of not delivering, blah, blah, blah. I think part of it is realizing it. And again, it goes back to sort of storytelling versus the modern world. Like storytelling moves you emotionally, and you have an emotional reaction to it, if we data rarely makes people, emotionally impacted. Let's put it that way. And then the other thing I would say in
your bank account or something after a lottery win. But yeah, exactly. Data rarely. It's like, okay, that's the data. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is that this is more about driving businesses and creating revenue growth and that kind of thing. You got to appreciate the dynamics, the interpersonal dynamics of teams.
Fair.
Right. So sometimes there's a wonderful methodology. It's called the circle of leverage. And the core principle, it's killing me. I can't remember the author. Anyway, the core principle is simple. In every organization, there are interpersonal dynamics which which you cannot know. Like, you don't know that the chief sales officer and the CTO don't really like each other, or that the guy who looks after business development, the guy who looks after customer service are both competing for a role, or blah, blah, blah. Like, there's, that the CEO is planning on leaving and deciding on a blah, whatever. There's all these dynamics inside organizations. And sometimes activating those dynamics is what causes action. Fair. So if you have a target, so for instance, in a sales model, in a business development model, you want to talk to this guy, or you want a particular action to happen, writing to the person or speaking to the person, you'd rather write, to be honest. Writing and CCing their boss, some peers, and their directs will activate all these things inside of the interpersonal dynamics that you don't know about. So everyone gets this email. It's to John. Susie's a peer of John, trying to look good to the CEO. The CEO may reply, "Who's responding to this?" Or, "John, did you respond to this?" Or maybe one of John's reports proactively says, "I'm going to grab that and make myself look good," blah, 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 blah. You don't need to know any of that. It doesn't matter. What matters is you have humans. There are all these humans that have interpersonal dynamics that tell stories amongst themselves, and you cause action by moving them, by creating an emotional environment where taking an action communicates to the rest of that team. Where the CEO goes, "Wow, John's direct, who I didn't really know very well, is really proactive. Look at the way they jumped on that." Or Susie, blah, blah, blah. Like, so all of those dynamics, you don't have to know what they are, but it will cause action.
Sure.
And it's amazingly valuable. Like, in my own career, like, watching that happen is it's entertaining and impactful.
It is. I agree highly. Just to watch. I mean, I think human behavior is incredible, and being an NLP guy and looking at the subconscious behaviors and subconscious actions, and it's fascinating seeing how like you said, how to cause action and to move people and create action in others, and why some people can effortlessly or seemingly effortlessly move people to, I don't know, do their best or take action or work harder or buy from you or whatever, and donate, and why some people, despite not without effort, despite a lot of effort, they don't. I'm not going to say they can't, because they can with the right tools. It's just they're not able to currently, or they haven't been able to currently. So it is amazing looking at that.
And it is that emotional. So I'll give you another example that's kind of a step up. So I often tell people, forget talking to the top 5 or even the top 10. And now, who am I talking about? It doesn't matter. Whatever the ranking is of who you want to talk to and who you want to do deals with, the top 5, pretty fat and happy. They're doing okay. Top 10, probably too. 11 through 20, they really want things to change. Like, they're working hard, right? So again, human dynamics, human incentives, emotions. The top 5 job is don't screw it up. The top 10 is we're okay. If we could get into the top 5, that'd be nice, but we're all right. 11 through 20, they're hungry. They're a little bit more hungry to see something different. What they're doing hasn't been working as well as they would like, assuming, I mean, that's obviously assuming the very American, everyone wants growth and everyone wants to be bigger. Like, it may probably not be the case, but, and I'm not saying you won't occasionally find a number 6 who's really hungry But so the other thing is the trend line. So if number 6 this year was 15 last year and 50 the year before, they're hungry. They're on the move. You can see action by looking over
Massive
time.
jump, yeah. Interesting.
And I see so many people banging their heads on walls, like wasting time with big brands because they're like, oh my God, if we got to do a deal
$1 million,
with them,
$100 million, yeah.
Well, I mean, the other reality of deal making is once the deal is done, you've now created an environment that something has to change. So inside the organization now, we've signed a deal. Now they got to change their behavior. I mean, I can't tell you how many deals you see in the world that people signed a phenomenal deal and nothing ever happened. Or it happened super slowly. It took 3 years for that deal to show any results, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I'm just talking about how do you cause action. Sometimes you got to work on the interpersonal dynamics of a company. Sometimes you look at the context of the company within the industry, right? Like those are both very real dynamics that matter, that, that cause activity, that have emotional impact on people.
Fair enough. I love that. I'm curious, what would you say has created a lot of your success? I mean, again, you did a lot of speaking. You're a consultant. You're working with different folks too. You've had a lot of success. What are some of the things that have created a lot of your success, Roy?
Well, a lot of what I'm talking about in terms of storytelling and everything is improv training. I mean, for all my fancy degrees or whatever, like being trained in improvisational theater is really impactful, because it does teach you about the core dynamics of storytelling and status and information delivery and moving people, right? A lot of that comes from, and again, it's not about quote education, it's about practice. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Improv is a practice. How do you learn improv? By improvising. Like that. That's like there's no, yeah, And so I would say that's one of the things. I think another thing is listening. For all of the times that you hear just listen, most people are pretty bad listeners. I'm a bad listener. I still consider myself a bad listener, and I'm actively trying to shut up and listen.
Well, that's when you can grow. If you're like, no, I'm good, or I'm a good, and you hear people say, no, I'm good with the personal skills, or no, I'm a good communicator. I'm like, but then there's no opportunity. You just shut down all opportunities to grow. And I happen to think most people are not a great. I was not, and I'm still not a perfect communicator. I've done a lot of work, but if I had said, no, I'm a great communicator, I would have missed out on tons of growth. I cut you off. Apologies. Go ahead.
No. I mean, the irony for me is that I would say it's people like us who have the biggest challenge, because if you're an extrovert, I'm a massive extrovert. I'm off the scale on extroversion, which means I am more than comfortable to fill the space.
Yeah.
And that listening is more challenging for me inherently by the nature of the beast, and by the way, as an extrovert manager, you lose a ton of value if you don't leave space for introverts to contribute.
Sure.
If you don't, there was a class in grad school called it was called Interpersonal Dynamics, but the students all call it touchy-feely. And it was about feedback and about how do you give and receive feedback. And one day the introverts came around and the spotlight was on me, and I learned more in that hour than I had in all the years prior.
Fair.
And I can't tell you nowadays, when I know that I'm, working with introverts, whether above or peers or below me, how I sit in a room actively in my head going, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. Just leave the space. Just because there's empty space doesn't mean you need to feel it. It's not your responsibility.
It's not the radio.
It's not the radio. And pay attention and listen, and then actively draw out people, right? Say, okay, that's fantastic, Kevin. I've heard yes, thank you. That's a great contribution. I want to hear what you have to say, Tom, because I value your opinion. Fair. Knowing that I'm drawing him out and leaving space for him to contribute.
Inviting the space, for them to, okay, here's a space. they can jump. Whereas you and me extroverts, we just jump in. Sometimes, yeah, introverts will need the invitation, need the space, like you said, to do it. It's interesting too, people with listening, we're often listening with assumptions, whether we're talking to our friend, our spouse, clients, all these, I'll go, they're probably going to say this, or this means that, I've heard this before. And I tell people, listen like from an empty place. Avoid assuming anything. Avoid, well, this probably means this, or they're probably going to do this, or they're not going to do this. You don't know. We assume in our, like I said, our brain is a prediction machine. That's one of the reasons why it's so efficient, but that's also some of the biggest problems in terms of learning and communication blocks, because it loves predicting, and it's very uncomfortable with situations where it can't predict what's going to happen. But to your point, it's I think valuable to listen with no assumptions, listen like with an empty cup, so to speak. Listen with an empty cup, and just learn. And instead of making assumptions, or oh yeah, I've talked to this person before, I know this kind of customer, I know this kind of person, or oh yeah, they're saying this, or they're talking about this, or just again listen. I tell people from an empty, neutral place. Assume you know nothing about anything. And
I mean, I would say, you know, it's almost, well, two things come to mind when you say that. One, it's almost harder with people you know well.
Fair.
Because, like it or not, you're bringing all the baggage of every prior interaction into this interaction, which may or may not be valuable, right? And then secondarily, you also do it with strangers. Stranger comes up to you, and without you having a single conscious thought, a pile of biases dump onto you, right? How they're dressed, how they walk, how they tilt their head, their glasses, their hair, their, you name it. Like, there are just a mountain of biases that happen. And then they open their mouth and their accent and their, I lived the last 12 years in London, in England. Now I'm back in the States now for just over 4 years. And in London, I'll say in the UK generally, when you open your mouth, they can tell where you were born, where you were raised, where you went to school, and possibly where you work.
Wow.
All with accent.
Wow.
The US is less so in that regard. I mean, our accents tend to be geographic, and pretty much that's it.
Fair.
Right? I mean, a Southern accent doesn't mean you're highly educated or not educated. It doesn't mean if you're affluent or not, or destitute. Like, you know, our accents don't tend to implicate that much. Whereas in the UK, they tell you a lot. And by the way, I'm an American. I could not tell that. But Brits with Brits, no question. They could tell you all sorts of stuff about them just from a few sentences.
That is fascinating. That's really interesting to know. Huh.
Yeah.
They're interesting. Well, last question for you. Standing out and being unique. Talk to us a bit about standing out. We've talked, I mean, a lot about it during here anyways, but any other tips or thoughts on really how to stand out, be unique? Because I think that's why people choose us, hire us to speak. They hire us to for their companies. They hire us to do a gig or consulting for them. You know, talk to us a bit about standing out and really showing our unique value.
Yeah. You know, again, I'll sort of bring this back to emotion. People feel good and think positively of you when you care about them. If the more questions you ask of a person, or the more you demonstrate listening to the speaker, the more that person feels, wow, that person really is amazing. They're really, you know, like because people love to talk about themselves. And they're pretty good at it, right? Like, but they want you to draw them out. They want you to you build a conversation and you build a relationship. And again, English is a funny word. Build, like you're literally building on the basis of demonstrating that I hear you, I see you, I value you, and I'm going to try and add value to you, right? So it's amazing to me sometimes you see folks who just don't do that at all. Like, doesn't matter what you said, their next sentence was planned before whatever you said happened.
they're thinking, it's like, okay, shut up so I can talk, hurry up, shut up so I can talk, hurry up so I can talk, and then blah, 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 here it is.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that kills rapport, kills trust, kills interest in doing anything with you, because they know you weren't listening. They know you don't care. I agree with you. I think that when you show someone you care, and there's a saying, how does it go? You know, when no one cares what you think until they think you care or something like that. If they know
Something
you
like
care,
that.
you don't care what you know.
Yeah. But again, that's how you personally are a memorable experience, because when people feel heard and they feel like you added value, not because you said something, because you heard what they said and responded. It's the trade, it's the interaction that is valuable, not the communication of a stock message, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's when people go, yeah, can we talk again? They want to engage again, because again, engage, right? Engage is the two parts linking together, right? It's not just throwing information over a wall.
Exactly. There's the value. They're getting value. Of course, they want to hang it with you,
Of course they
they're
want,
getting value
yeah.
versus
Like,
you ramming some down the throat or selling them on something or pitching on something. And before they know that you care and before you show you care, I tell people, aim to serve, aim to help, have no attachment. Whatever your thing is you're selling,
totally.
go, aim to serve, give value, show value. And I'd like to have fun while I'm doing it as well. I mean, why the heck not?
Actually, there was one thing that we didn't touch on that I normally talk about is
Please.
the value of humor, of using humor to communicate. So, in all of my professional speaking, there's a lot of humor. I love Dilbert. I don't know if you know Dilbert.
I love Dilbert. Love Dilbert.
But Dilbert, there's a lot of very, very relevant, information in 3 panels of Dilbert.
Yep.
And my main deck that I used for over a decade had at least half a dozen Dilberts in it. That were dead on point, that were exactly the message I wanted to communicate, but did it in a humorous way that I could then expound upon. And telling jokes. I mean, it's funny. We definitely have this undercurrent in sort of professional is not funny. Is like professional and humor are somewhat. You're being less professional if you're funny. And that could be true, but it also probably means you're less memorable, right? If I can make you laugh, then I'm going to be more memorable. No question. No question. And why? Because I've triggered an emotion that people will go, yeah. Oh no, he's a good guy. I like him, and he's a great guy. He listens. He made, he told this joke I'll never forget. Blah blah blah.
That's the thing. And I mean, there are a lot of studies on neurology and neuroscience that where you link emotion of any kind, especially humor, but emotion of any kind with an idea or a fact or data or a person. And, it's in there. I mean, whether it's your parents yelling at you, you're a bad boy when you're a little kid, banging your toys on the floor, or whether it's, you're teaching something and there's humor there. Oh, wow. 1 + 1 is 2 or whatever. And you're right that it goes in and it sticks in a really positive way. So I think you're right. It's unfortunate that some people don't think humor is professional. I mean, you got to keep it, within some sort of rails. But I and I really think that it's valuable to have humor. It keeps people up. It wakes people up, perks people up. It can cut the silence and really add to presentations too. I'm glad you mentioned that.
The other actual thing about it, which I think is maybe somewhat underappreciated, humor is about truth. Humor, 99% of the time, is when someone states a truth to you that you either didn't appreciate as much or missed or didn't understand or didn't know about, right? It's the reason we laugh is we go, oh yeah, that's true. Like, and a ton of, stand-up comedy is basically truth telling.
Truth, exactly.
Talking about stand up and they go, truth, and then you laugh because you're like, true. And by the way, so that, and the reason I put it in that context is then you're trustworthy.
Fair.
Because you stated truth honestly and it made them laugh, and now it increases your own trustworthiness.
Fair point.
Because you can see truth.
That's a really good point about you're right. A lot of humor it's truth. It's and I always joke when I talk to people. It's like, thank goodness we're all out of jail now. After COVID, it's going and everyone laughs because we felt like we were in jail. We couldn't do anything. So
exactly.
And to your point, and that creates rapport and a laugh and a good feeling, and then we start off the conversation on a good foot. So
exactly.
Very fair point. Very fair point. That's amazing. This has been awesome. Roy, again, You're a revenue accelerant. You're a growth driver for organizations as well. This has been awesome. I appreciate you being on here and your time. It's been a lot of fun. What's the best way to people reach you? I have it down here, but what's the best way people can get a hold of you?
Yeah, well, my pleasure. I really appreciate the time, Robert. It's been good. I'm Roy Vella at everything. So at Roy Vella on Twitter, LinkedIn, it's /Roy Vella, Roy Vella at Gmail, you name it. You put just my name with no punctuation, all one word, and I'm easy to find.
Amazing. Amazing. Cool. Well, I appreciate your time. Again, this is Roy Vella. Thanks for being here. I am James Robert Elliott, and it's been a pleasure as well. And everyone, till next time, go have your best day ever.